guys do this like every day?
If we're lucky.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of the Pitt Season 2, Episode 2. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. During this conversation, we are going to be reviewing, recapping, and spoiling everything in the Pitt Season 2, Episode 2. Hour 2, it can be referred to 8 a.m., another way to refer to the episode. So why don't we start by talking about overall thoughts, and then what we're going to do is I will bring up some of the big cases that happen in this episode, and then at the end we'll kind of rattle through some of the smaller cases and go from there. So Patrick, overall thoughts on the episode?
A solid episode of the Pitt. It feels like we're still laying the track for a lot of the broader storylines to play out, which is how last season worked and how this season is working. Despite being set during July 4th, we're still not getting a ton of, I think the expectation was like fireworks ahoy, and I'm sure we'll get there, but I'm just really enjoying, as I did in the premiere, our time spent with these characters and realizing where they're at and getting some sense of where they're going to be going over the course of this shift. I also think it's interesting. The Pitt was often for the better and sometimes for the worse, kind of finger waggy about its moralizing and the stances it was taking, especially vis-a-vis COVID and the importance of science in the first season. I do wonder if we're seeing a bit of a course correction or a tone correction this season, as evidenced in a sequence where generative AI is used, and the way in which its flaws are pointed out felt more subtle than, like, the Pitt was not subtle like last season when it had, I thought, felt like
it had
equivalent moments.
It had a very nuanced take on AI and the usage of AI.
And I don't mean that to say it's approving of it. I just mean when the Pitt is a show that wears its morals, its ethics, what it thinks is important is good on its sleeve, and like that's cool. Like I like the fact that the show does that. It feels meaningfully different, and not necessarily something you'd think of in the DNA of a show like this. I just mean it felt a little bit sometimes in season 1 like the Pitt's turning to the camera and going, "Hey, do you know that's bad? It's bad." And there's just more subtle ways to convey that. And maybe the show is going to be the show and we'll get those moments going on. But I don't think it's be the last time that generative AI. I expect this is maybe itself laying the track for a much bigger problem later on. But I did think it more subtly navigated the experiences that lots of people are having with AI being shoved into our lives, and maybe sometimes looking at it as like, ooh, a neat magic trick that could be useful, and then also discovering its many, many flaws.
Yeah.
So overall, good. I'm in, and I'm, we're not at fireworks yet, and I mean that both in terms of like stories paying off and literal fireworks, but I thoroughly enjoyed on this episode of The Pitt.
Yeah. A very solid episode. I don't like it when mom and dad fight, and maybe that's just me, but I think
gonna get worse before it gets better, David. I really feel like
we're seeing Dr. Baran Al-Hashimi and Dr. Rabi be at loggerheads with each other repeatedly, and sometimes one of them has a good point, sometimes the other one has a good point. I think that an interesting dynamic, I think, is this idea of following the rules and the procedures and doing what's right for the patient. Like that, though the show is drawing a clear boundary between those two things, and Al-Hashimi is very much like, hey, let's do what the book says, because by the way, if we do what the book says, we'll be less likely to get sued. And Dr. Rabi is more like, I know exactly how to handle this, and even if it's not what the book says, it's going to be better for the patient, it's going to be better for the doctor. And really, I think it's pitting the rules and regulations and so on as opposed to patient care, like that the institution and the rules and the edifice of healthcare has in some ways started to interfere with patients getting good care. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. Having said that, I wish these two would just get along. It's unpleasant. I don't like.
It's the way this show, the Pitt is like a broadly, everyone has their problems and their tensions, but you get the sense that they're all going to come together at the end. I wonder if that's how this relationship ends. Like, is this still going to be one where, as I put it last week, like, will she be invited to come have a beer at the end of the shift in the park?
Yeah.
Or do they leave with like wildly divergent paths, and like we leave this season with the two of them not on the same page, but he comes back to a radically different, workspace. I think that's really on the table, and like set some really interesting stakes for the already greenlit season 3 of like, they're setting up an interesting time gap with like where this relationship ends up has like really interesting implications for the future of the series.
Agreed. I do want to acknowledge before we move forward with this episode and talking about it, we did get a couple comments about last week's episode that I wanted to acknowledge. We did get some comments saying that they felt last week our conversation was a little bit too spoilery for their taste, and I just want to let people know that has been acknowledged, and we will work on that and make sure that does not happen. For the record, Patrick nor I have seen any future episodes of the show as we're talking about it, so we cannot spoil anything because we don't know anything. Anything we say about future episodes is purely speculation, and I do not consider that spoilers. We did get this email to decodingtv@gmail.com. I am not going to read the name of the person for obvious reasons. They've asked to stay anonymous, but they write into decodingtv@gmail.com. Hey, David, love the show and can't wait to listen to the rest of the recaps of the Pit. Patrick is such a great co-host and guest, and I love hearing his perspective along with yours. You both have great chemistry. Wow. Patrick's
all right, let her over. Great feedback. Love it. I don't know why they had to be anonymous to just say nice things about me, but hey, I get it.
I'm emailing because I was listening to the recent recap of episode 1 of the Pit, and I wanted to talk about the way benzodiazepine addiction was talked about. I have a close family member who is prescribed benzos for some basic general anxiety by a careless doctor. The doctor didn't explain the dangers and also did not monitor the amount of medication they were taking. After a while, this family member became addicted to benzos, and they didn't even know it, and neither did anyone else. None of our interactions made us think this person was addicted or abusing this drug. Long story short, after multiple stays in the hospital and treatment for the addiction and managing withdrawal, this family member is living a completely normal life. I bring it up because there are multiple mentions of Langdon being high from it in this episode, as if it would somehow make him worse or dangerous of a doctor, but this isn't a fair description of people taking benzos. At least when people don't take too much, I'm sure there are exceptions for many addicts. When most people start taking benzos for anxiety, it often makes people feel normal and calms their brain. Then pair that with the addictive properties and the vicious cycle of withdrawal, which leads to more anxiety, which leads to more of it. Obviously, Langdon was addicted and wrong to do what he did, but I just want to provide context that often people on or addicted to benzos can act completely normal. If anything, it can cause people to act more like themselves because the anxiety becomes manageable. It also is what makes benzos addiction so pernicious, and why I love the show portrayed an incredibly competent and smart doctor who knows better, who still got addicted to them. I never would have known this myself without the family experience either, end quote. So thank you to whoever sent that in, whose name we're not discussing, but I thought that was a good perspective on what a benzos addiction would actually look like from somebody out there in the Decoding TV audience. So anyway, just something to consider as we talk about Langdon's fate in this season of the show. All right, Patrick, let's talk about some of the cases. So I've divided this up into kind of like main cases where we might have some implications to discuss, and then just other kind of random smaller cases. All right, so let's start with the main cases. We have Alan Billings, who had a pallet of roofing tiles fell on his arm with an open dislocation, like bone coming out of his arm. By the way, the show is really not for the squeamish in general this episode.
I feel like the show, behind the scenes, they got to be like, "Ooh, we're gonna get them." Like we're gonna get because they don't have to they don't have to show, but the show almost delights in the reveal of the gruesome in a way that I really enjoy. I mean, I can understand why this would put people off. I've heard commentary from folks in this first season where like that was something they couldn't handle and it put them off the show. But I really appreciate the fact that the show has you sit with the squeamish parts of being a doctor and healthcare, not just alongside the dramatic ways that they can save or not save people, but like the bodies are fucking weird, man. And I think the Pit leans into that in a way that feels very notable. And it's part of why I'm glad it's on, HBO, right? Like if it wasn't, then you'd probably be cutting away from stuff like this.
So this guy with an open dislocation is on the table, and this is one of, I would say, 2 stories that shows the contrast between Dr. Rabi and Dr. Baron Al-Hashimi, because essentially Dr. Al-Hashimi says, hey, we should be doing this in the OR. We should be doing this with ortho.
Human head is not reducing.
Should be done in the OR.
I am the OR.
And everyone in the room basically laughs at her because she doesn't understand how things work. That the idea is that if they waited for ortho, it would take potentially hours and then they wouldn't be able to help this guy. So they just basically try to help him there. And I do think that Dr. Al-Hashimi was kind of receptive to this idea. She wasn't like super objecting that they were doing this because I think she understood that this guy needs help immediately. But it is a kind of there is a big difference between how you think things work and how things work in reality. And that is a contrast that I think this show will continue to draw throughout this season. The other case that draws the distinction between these 2 doctors is with Barry Mitchell, who's eating breakfast at Pamela's when he experiences sudden respiratory distress. And essentially he got some broccoli lodged in his airway. And there is apparently proper procedure is to use ketamine and an additional drug that would require more intense treatment and a lot more
specifically.
Intubation and a lot more distress for the patient, work for the doctors, and so on. And Dr. Rabi says, let's just do ketamine. If it's an obstructed airway, ketamine is all they need. And in fact, he is correct. And it's a sign where, hey, even though it's the proper procedure to use both drugs, like in fact, we don't need to, and everyone made it out okay, even though we just use ketamine. So yeah, we've already talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to kind of bring these 2 cases up as like setting up some of the moral, emotional stakes of what's going on between these 2 doctors. Any other thoughts on those cases, Patrick?
Well, and I think you can contrast that against, there is a scene in the show where a patient is going to be transferred for what is said out loud by Dr. Rabi and a new character who I think is the new romantic interest for Dr. Rabi for insurance reasons. But there's clearly something else going on, and we don't know what that something else is. But without knowing whatever shoe there is to drop about that case that I'm sure we'll get some sense on later on, it's not as though even Dr. Rabi is immune to putting a patient through something that is suboptimal, right? Like, sure, will the patient be fine transferred to another hospital? Yeah, probably. But like, would it be better for the patient to stay here and have the treatment and be discharged here? Like, yeah, you're decreasing variables for things to go wrong. And so it's not as though Dr. Rabi isn't sometimes considering those things. And I'll be fascinated to learn more about like why that specific instance occurred and why they're hiding something, given how he feels about these other circumstances where you should always follow what is best, straddling the line between patient and doctor.
Yeah. But you are alluding to the fact that apparently Dr. Rabi and Noel Hastings, the care manager on site, are apparently romantically involved. I did like that moment that Noel shares with Nurse Dana, where she says, I hope you know what you're doing.
Hastings? Evans. Hope you know what you're doing. What is that supposed to mean?
And she says, I'm a big girl. And she's like, okay, big girl.
When she says, okay, big girl, just like.
I'm a big girl. Okay, big girl.
Strong parent energy, like disappointed parent energy there. Yeah. Okay, everyone's got to make their own mistakes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Other cases that occurred this week. Mrs. Bostick, or Miss Bostick, an elderly patient with Alzheimer's, and her husband died last episode. Dr. Whitaker needs to give Miss Bostick the bad news. On that note, I do want to acknowledge one moment we didn't discuss from last week's episode that I thought was very meaningful was when Dr. Whitaker leads the other students in a moment of silence for the patient that's passed away. And then, Dr. Rabi sees it and realizes that his work has been passed on to the next generation. And that's a very powerful moment. So I just wanted to acknowledge that from last episode. I love that. Okay. Anyway, Miss Bostick cannot remember that her husband is dead. And this reminded me, I've brought this up before on podcasts that I've done before, so I'm sorry if you've heard this again, but there is an article in the New Yorker from 2018 called The Comforting Fictions of dementia care that I thought was very interesting. And it's essentially asks the question, is it okay to lie to dementia patients? Because what is going on here is Miss Bosick is forgetting that she's lost her husband, and then Dr. Whitaker feels obliged to inform her again. And then obviously that gets her very agitated, and we see this happen multiple times during the course of the episode. And it's like, I think there is no, as far as I can understand, there's no settled beliefs on like what is the best way to handle this, because you're kind of re-traumatizing these people, right? Like you're saying, hey, this horrible thing that you've forgotten, it's still true, and so then it's like, who really benefits from that? Like, is that making the world better? Is that making the patient better? Like, is it okay to lie to the patient ever? Basically, is the question that's asked.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, but I have personal experience with this in my life with a family member. She's still alive, 99 going on 100. And the policy, like, it's a little without getting into the weeds. A lot of family drama in which, like, the house that she was in as she was being moved into medical care and some associated financials things were sold that were not supposed to be sold until she actually died. And then members of the family outvoted other members of the family to go against her wishes because she has dementia and won't be aware of the things that are happening. Caused a lot of turmoil and angst and family members not talking to each other. All to say, I still see her a couple of times a year. She's in a care facility, but still comes down to a part of Wisconsin that I visit very frequently. And the places she goes when she visits are just down the street from the house that she used to own that has now been demolished, a pier that she used to own that has now transferred ownership, that were supposed to stay generationally within the family. And the great care is taken to not have her walk past those places, to not bring up those places, because it is specifically, as you said, to re-traumatize her over actions that were taken. Her husband passed away decades and decades ago. We talk about him in the present. We ask, like, not like, what did you do with him last night? Not like active lies, but like the way her mind works, how many dementia patients work. They work very poorly in short term, but their long term embedded memory is very good. Yeah. What was your wedding like? She can walk you through 10 minutes of like all the specific details of her wedding. And so that's how conversations go with her when you're around her, is ask her questions about the past, and you can have a very engaging, delightful conversation with her. But there is absolutely no reason other than to fulfill your own feelings,
sense of justice, sense
you
of truth.
You are projecting yourself onto her, and that is not fair. And your, like, the collective, like, sort of friends and family group decided, like, our jobs as like her little village is to make her happy and comforted in the time she has left within the capacity that she has to understand that and enjoy it. And if you want to have a drink and bitch about all the other things that went wrong, do that in your own time. Don't do that in hers. So it's a fine, like, I think it's a slightly different relationship as projected in the show, where like a doctor is what is their responsibility. But from my own personal experience, I fall on the spectrum of, if the lie is not doing harm, it's okay. It's okay to lie, because it's a different set of what does it mean to bring joy and happiness and stability to that person. It's a different question.
What does do no harm mean?
What does do no harm context is a different question. Right? I agree.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Patrick. Yeah, that's sounds like a challenging situation. I don't blame Dr. Whitaker for how he behaved in the show. Like, I think he's just trying to do what comes naturally.
Climbing a ladder to get to exactly what I just talked about, which is, I think he will end in a place where, like, he could do the repetitive thing again. Yeah. And he won't. And she will go on. She'll be discharged to a facility, as they talk about in a scene in the show. And I think that's probably where I like this, what I just talked about, where I think there's going to be a scene where he asks questions about her husband, and like she talks about a dinner or their time together, and it's gonna bring a tear to your eye. And I think he's gonna end up at the exact same place that like I have ended up with this individual.
Let's hope
and it'll be very touching.
Until Dr. Al-Hashimi comes in and says, "No, we must tell her the truth."
ChatGPT told us.
Yeah. There is a story of a nun who has gonorrhea in her eye. And I thought this is a great storyline because when you heard about it, you're like, oh, like I can't wait to find out about how this nun has gone against her commitments to Christ and so on.
Maybe it's an immaculate infection. We'll call the lab soup, clear this up. Tread carefully, Missy.
But then the show pulls does a rug pull on you and is like, no, actually, it was nothing sexual. It was actually because the nun was too good. The nun was too holy, right? She's helping people who are unhoused and in challenging situations and using her bare hands and handling their clothing and stuff. And that's how she contracted gonorrhea in her eye. And so anyway, I just thought that was like a fun subversion, I think, of what the audience might expect from that plot line. Because you think, oh, there's going to be some fun, lascivious story about this nun. And no, it turns out, actually, how dare you think that?
I know what gonorrhea is, Dr. Javati. I'm a nun, not a numbskull.
How dare you think that?
This is very good.
And then finally, there is a storyline with a guy named Mr. Randall who has been erect for 8 hours. Apparently
Christ.
Received 2 ED injections because he really just wanted to make sure all systems were go for his 20th wedding anniversary. And then they need to drain his member. And they show an erect penis on screen, which, by the way, is extremely rare to see in any film or TV show that's not pornography. And we actually, very minor spoiler for the chair company, but this is actually the second erect penis that we've seen on screen on HBO Max over the course of the last few months. So I do think that HBO Max is like, they've heard the criticism of all the breasts that have appeared on all the shows. They're like, we're gonna get those numbers up for the penises. And anyway, I it's just notable, and I guess they thought, hey, the one situation where it's okay to show it is in a medical environment where we need to drain that sucker of blood.
Got me to look away. I'm not squeamish, but I got to be perfectly honest. The moment that needle went in, I got up and I need to go. I'm gonna go get another beer. I'm good. Like, you want me to pause it? No. You could just. I can hear it. I can hear what they're saying.
So your wife was watching it, and she's like, "This is cool with me."
I don't know about cool, but it didn't bother her. I looked away. I looked away.
I mean, there is this kind of. It's funny because I think there's this kind of glee that the show takes in testing the boundaries of what it knows you'll want to see. Right?
Yep.
And I think showing a massive needle going into an erect penis, as you did in this episode, is like,
show me the guts. Show me the guts. Like, show me the inside of an elbow. That's fine. But
the show is like somebody is shooting that scene, like getting the prosthetic set up and shooting it, and they're like, they're gonna love this, like I just can imagine them doing.
Where's the Vulture article about the erect penis in season 2 of The Pitt?
All right, a few other things to mention that happened this episode. Dr. Langdon sees a woman who glued her eye shut with super glue. We don't exactly know what's going to happen there. Mr. Williams, the guy from last episode, is getting a CT. No results yet. Dr. Mel gets hit on by a guy who is confronted by the police, who then knocks her over. She hits her head. We learn that the guy robbed a liquor store and then wipes out. And then that's why he goes into the hospital. There is this lovely scene where Dr. Langdon confesses to her about the benzos and all that stuff, and then treats her with a great deal of humanity and understanding, and like understands, her mental state and what she needs to adapt, and turns off the lights and like removes the stimulus for her. And I thought that was very loving and compassionate of Dr. Langdon. I did want to point out there is the unhoused gentleman from last episode who they hose him down. Dr. Mohan meets Nurse Emma, and Nurse Emma does an elbow bump instead of shaking her hand.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have interacted with David Chen anytime in the last 5 years, when COVID happened, I resolved to myself, I am never shaking another person's hand for the rest of my life.
Okay.
And I haven't kept. I've shaken like 2 to 3 hands. One of them was my VP, who like I was like, I'm not going to do the whole handshake.
I think so.
Thing.
You're. It's more like you're attaching stakes, like personal stakes, to the handshake. Like, what are the social and personal financial consequences of not doing the handshake?
Well, if there are occasionally social and financial consequences, I will shake the hand. But like, it's extremely like out of hundreds of hands that have been offered to me, I've shaken maybe like 2 or 3 of them over the course of the last 5 years. And what I'll do is, and I think I've done this with you, Patrick, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, somebody will reach out their hand to be shaken, and I'll say, "Hey, actually, I'm doing elbow bumps these days," and I'll offer my elbow, and then it's usually they elbow bump me, and it's just completely fine. And the reason for that is because I think it's a barbaric practice that easily transfers germs. And I thought that after COVID, we were going to stop doing stuff like that. But turns out people like shaking each other's hands. So whatever. Anyway, I felt Nurse Emma Nolan understood me in that moment. So I loved that. I love to see her doing elbow bumps. So like, normalize the elbow bump, Patrick. Normalize the elbow bump. Okay. We've already talked about Alan Billings needed an insurance transfer. There is an interesting scene of Mel being afraid to testify for malpractice, and Dr. Robbie tries to assure her the average emergency physician is sued once every 7 years, and 9 out of 10 times the doctor wins. Who wouldn't be assured by those statistics, Patrick? And then he throws it over to Dr. Al-Hashimi. Dr. Al-Hashimi, how many times have you been sued? None.
Dr. Al?
I've never been named in a lawsuit.
Well, it's funny because she gets another crack at it, right? So that is definitely a situation where you should lie. Like, just say that you've been sued, or like you've been.
I've lost count. I don't even know how many.
Or just point. It can even be like a pit, like, oh, one of the doctors I worked with, like blah blah. Like, she just is like, no, it's never happened to me, which comes off as like an air of superiority. Which
obviously, I think she's proud of it. She's proud of the fact that she's never been sued. I think.
But then there's a moment she gets later with her in which she says, like, as she's like stressed about like the possibility of this happening, like she turns to her and says, like, but I know, like, I've studied your work. You are like meticulous. You are confident. Like, you are a good doctor. And that's actually, like, on balance, we expect Dr. Robbie to have like the pep talk that is needed.
Right.
And the pep talk she needed was that.
Yeah.
Not what Dr. Robbie, like, it happens, like lawsuits or
shit happens.
Right.
You're going to be fine. Yeah. But you're right. Dr. Al-Hashimi nailed it that time. She's got some wins. Speaking of which, we should probably talk a little bit about the AI scene, right? And you already mentioned it, but so I guess the only thing I'll add is what I really like about the AI scene, where Al-Hashimi presents an AI app that will help you transcribe and summarize things and will reduce your time spent charting and give you more time to spend with patients. A genuinely good thing is I love how insidious it is, right? Because AI comes in with this air of infallibility. People look at it, they're like, oh, this is incredible. This looks like it's 100% correct. Oh, wait. It's actually 95% correct because he got wrong this medication that the patient was taking. And then she says, yes, of course, AI is never perfect, but it's very good, and you should always carefully proofread everything. And then you realize, like, this is how it starts.
Yeah.
It starts with, oh, it's very good. You should carefully proofread. And then you do this 100 times, and you're like, I don't need to proofread this. I don't need to proofread this. And then, like, the errors start slipping through, and then something horrible happens. And it's like,
it feels like that is like so obviously going to be what like some version of like a drug that they're on or will be prescribed will be not, and will result in something catastrophic or something bad happening. Like, it's hard for me to imagine this is a one-off. I strongly suspect that this is going to be something that causes a real problem.
But I love that it shows you how seductive this idea is of, hey, there's a little machine that can just take care of everything for you. And it's like, it's not at that state right now.
Because it is cool. And like,
if it did work that way, it would be awesome.
It's easy to imagine the magic trick being useful, but it's worth, like, that 2% is, especially given, depending on the context, that 2% could be like a mild annoyance or like life or death. And it's like, if you use it in your personal life for like an email you're sending for work, like, okay, that 2%, maybe not that high of stakes. But, when you've got Microsoft out being here, like, so we put Copilot into Microsoft Excel. By the way, it's bad with numbers. Like, so just like, don't use it. I mean, they put out a statement that was like, don't, like, be careful if you're using this in like high stakes financial scenarios. It's like, well, then why are we rolling this? Why are we rolling this out? So, yeah, very similar situation.
Yeah. There was a DKA or diabetic ketoacidosis case in which a dangerous buildup of ketones makes your blood acidic. Thought it was worth mentioning that. We saw a little bit of contrast of doctor techniques in that case as well. And then we got a preview of next week's cases. Here are a few that might be relevant next week. Clint Hansen and his cousin Mona. His cousin Mona pours bacon grease into his sink while he's washing dishes, gives him this horrible grease burn. Why would you ever do that? Never pour bacon grease down the sink. Like, your pipe, you're completely destroying your pipes, dude. Don't do that. Don't do that. Anyway, I'm glad this show has home improvement tips as well as medical tips. There's a guy named Orlando Diaz who tripped over some rebar, and then a combative college kid in the hospital that comes at the end, right when Dr. Robbie says smugly, "Oh, do you want to cover all those hospital improvements, or should we take care of this kid who's screaming his head off?" Anyway, so yeah, those are a bunch of things that happened in the Pitt season 2, episode 2. Patrick Klepek, any other moments or cases or thoughts on this week's events?
No, but I am back where I was before, which is I am seated at 8 p.m. for a new episode of the Pitt. If this is kind of the ebb and flow you got to go on with a show like this, where like really exciting first episode, nothing wrong with just a solid episode. If you're going to be 15 episodes, there have to be lower stakes and stake setting for the show. So I'm just anxious to see where it starts paying some of that off.
I guess I just wanted to throw a shout out for Dr. Mel, who is very precious, and the whole interaction she had with that patient was very amusing because he's clearly hitting on her as hard as possible, and she just is not even picking up it at all. And then I'm like, well, probably somehow this is going to work out, that he's going to just directly ask her out at some point. But no, it turns out he's actually a felon. And
and then the more revealing part is how many times it takes for her to give a direct answer on what makes her happy. She is, portrayed as she obviously is a very empathetic person. Yeah. But whenever it's like, what do you do?
Neurodivergent.
But also, what do you do for fun? Yeah. I take care of my sister.
Right.
What do you do for fun? You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way her life is structured. She is someone giving a lot to other people and spending very, very little time on herself. I fully expect between like the 21st birthday that they're talking about planning, the like her not like centering or thinking about like what makes her happy. Like, those seem to be core parts of where we're like characters. It's a medical drama, but also it's one that cares deeply about the inner lives and happiness of those characters. And I suspect that's going to be one of those arcs we go on this season.
Indeed. I've said this, and I'll probably say it many times going forward, but she must be protected at all costs. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. All right. Those are our thoughts on the Pitt Season 2, Episode 2. Let us know what you think at decodingtv@gmail.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe. And you can also check out the podcast, Decoding TV, wherever you get your podcasts. He's Patrick Klepek. I'm David Chen. Thanks for checking out our coverage of the Pitt this week. We'll be back with more coverage next week of the next episode of the show. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.